Good morning and welcome everyone to the 11th webinar in the Governing for Reform webinar series. Today we're talking about strategic planning, putting humans at the centre. My name's Ben Wallace and I lead KPMG's National Policy, Economics and Public Impact Practice, and it's my great pleasure to be your host today. Before moving into the official agenda, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land I'm coming to you from today. So, Mani Ngā Budni, welcome everybody. Nalu Tempindi, Yalaka Nalu Gana, Yatanka Imperendi. We acknowledge the land we meet on today as the traditional lands of the Ghana people. Nalu Tempindi, Panaku, Talyatanka, and we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. I'd like to acknowledge in particular any Aboriginal leaders past, present, and emerging we may have on the call today. Before moving on to the formal agenda, just by way of context, and those of you on the call will know more about this than I do, but it's fair to say that the aged care sector is in a period of unprecedented change and reform. And that term unprecedented is thrown around a lot in recent times, but it certainly applies to the aged care sector at present. Aged care in Australia and more broadly human and social services have a really proud history of purpose-driven work with some of our more vulnerable communities. And through that proud tradition, there have been lots of wonderful things achieved, lots of great service provided. Equally, we know through the Royal Commission and other sources that there have been significant failures in the way in which we've gone about delivering care. Recent reforms are impacting the sector from a whole range of angles. Fundamentally, a shift toward greater consumer direction, resulting in changes in funding models, changes in the regulatory environment, and changes in the delivery environment at a really practical level, making it challenging for organisations to generate operating profits. So in that context of challenge and change, on the one hand, strategy and a long-term strategy becomes challenging to set. And on the other hand, having a North Star guiding your organisation forward is more important than ever. And in the midst of that, an agility in the way in which that strategy is implemented becomes really important. So today's webinar really is about us exploring how we navigate that, the importance of strategy, the need for agility, and the role of the human in being central to that strategy, the human being both consumer and workforce. So before moving on to introduce our fabulous panel today, I need to go through the mandatory advertorial. So I'm conscious many of you may have been to Governing for Reform webinars or other activities before, but some of you may be joining us for the first time. So if you are first-time callers, then welcome to Governing for Reform. As a registered participant, you've got access to a whole range of materials. If you'd like to head to the Governing for Reform website, you can access materials related to today's discussion. We have a strategic planning toolkit. There's a podcast around strategy and innovation. We have modules around continuous improvement, succession planning, workforce planning and management, among a whole range of other things, including recordings of the previous 10 webinars in the series. Just before diving into our discussion with the panellists, I'll just draw your attention to the screen. This might be a format that's unfamiliar to you. You are able to drag and shift and change the shape of any of the windows on your screen to suit your particular needs. Can I also encourage you to pop questions in the chat? Our staff will be looking at those questions as we go through the session today, and we'd love to get your interaction so we can try and guide the conversation to answer issues or questions specifically of interest to you. So I'd like now to move to introducing our panel. We have three amazing guests to talk about this topic with us today. So I'd like to first introduce Andrew Condon. Andrew's had a really diverse career in leadership and management roles, backgrounds in agriculture, engineering, defence, social and welfare services, aged care, retirement living, and sports administration. Andrew's a graduate of the Royal Military College of Science in Shrivenham, UK, and also the US Army Command and General Staff College. He was appointed Chief Executive Officer of Sydney Legacy. He's appointed to the Prime Ministerial Advisory Council on Ex-Service Matters, the Board of Vassy Housing New South Wales. In 2016, Andrew was appointed to the Board of RSL Lifecare as a Director and appointed as Chair in 2017. I'd like next to introduce Vanessa Janison. Vanessa joined Calvary Healthcare just prior to the commencement of the pandemic in September 2019. She was appointed as Regional Chief Executive Officer, looking after public and private hospitals, aged care and community services. In 2020, Vanessa was appointed as the National Director of Strategy and Service Development, building on her 20 years plus of experience in public health, leading clinical services and implementing reform. Vanessa's senior executive experience covers a whole range of areas and is supported by qualifications in accounting, marketing, business administration and corporate governance. And we're also joined by Shane Ogilvie. Shane is Chief Executive of Bethany Housing and also responsible for more broadly for the Bethany Group's strategic initiatives around growth, innovation and technology. Prior to joining Bethany, Shane has had a diverse career, including supporting the launch of an Australian market-first wearable payment product. He had time in a startup digital bank in South Africa and has been an executive manager of strategic partnerships with the Commonwealth Bank Group as part of Bankwest, as well as business manager for the Australian operations of Austral Limited. Shane's an actuary by training and also holds qualifications in accounting and was previously chairperson of Spirit of the Streets charity. So welcome to you all, and I'll invite our guests into the session now. I'm fantastically pleased to have you. We're coming from multiple different geographies, multiple different roles in the aged care sector, and it's fascinating to see the pathways you've each charted to the roles you're in now. And so keen to pick up on that diversity of experience as we work through our questions today as well. Let's start, if I can, with a broad question about, in the context of that challenge and change we're seeing in the aged care sector, how important do you see setting an effective strategy as being in that current context? And if we get that right, what is it that strategy piece can drive for us in terms of outcomes in our organisation? So I might come first to you, Andrew, if that's okay.
Yes, look, good morning, everybody. Look, in terms of strategy, particularly in the current environment, for me, what is critical here is getting the purpose clarified. In many organisations, there will be a general sense of what the purpose of the organisation is, but I think in the environment where there's so much uncertainty looking forward, we have to be clear about our purpose, what the outcomes we're after and the impact we're after. And it is with that lens that as we then work into the complexity of the environment that we're in and the environment that we'll go into, that'll essentially give us that unifying thinking such that everything that we do in the organisation is then to achieve the purpose. It's a lens as to how we think about the various components of the strategy and the outcomes. And essentially, for me, purpose is critical because it essentially everything has to fit in with we're fitting with a purpose, and everything then drives within the strategy to achieve that purpose. So I think it's, we're in a really interesting point in time in this sector, and my first piece of advice is, get clarity around your purpose.
Thanks, Andrew. I might throw to Shane on this. I think each of your organisations has got a sort of long history of being purpose-led and purpose-driven, and it's interesting to see in the context of the changes that we're seeing throughout the sector, in some senses, that alignment to purpose becoming more rather than less important. That North Star as the place we're driving towards. I'm also interested, as we go through the conversation, to pick up, well, how do you balance that purpose with responding to the more near-term challenges that you face? How do you stay true to a North Star while remaining agile in the face of changing circumstances? Shane, your views on the importance of strategy, particularly in the context we're in at the moment?
Yeah, thanks. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be with you today. Pardon me. I think the importance of having that North Star to keep your entire organisation focused on your real purpose for the long-term plan for the organisation enables you to put in place or to have markers for your short-term initiatives that may react to the short to medium-term changes or fluctuations that you see in the market. So we at the Bethany Group, we're a for-purpose organisation, a faith-based organisation, and we have a mission discernment framework. And so we start with our mission discernment framework in most of the decisions that we make, particularly key strategic decisions. And a key component of that mission discernment framework is involving customers and the key influencers for our customers, which are often family members or their close networks. And by involving them in developing what is our North Star and our strategy, and staying true to our purpose and keeping that in mind in our shorter term decision making, we can make sure that the decisions we make today are going to set the organisation up for our long term future.
Thanks, Shane. Vanessa, interested in whether you'd like to build on that. I think, in particular, maybe whether you've got any examples of where that kind of North Star has helped more tactical decision making as well, whether, often strategy and short term come into conflict a bit, and how can a good strategy help navigate that?
Yeah, look, I totally agree with the fellow panel members. Is creating that North Star is critically important. I think in that process, now more than ever, it's really also important to engage your consumers and your staff in this. And I'd say staff particularly because they're looking for a sense of who are they working for, what do they stand for, how do I be a part of that future, and giving them permission to actually enact that vision that you have on a practical level inside the organisation is super critical. I think the agility piece is really interesting, and I think we are seeing change speed up in our industry, and transformation of our product is going to be really important going forward, because we know the consumers want a different product, a different offering in the market. And so one of the things that we think about is, while it's important to have that North Star, that strategic intent, I think the days of 5-year strategies are kind of out the window. You've got to know who you are, what you're standing for, what you want to be in the market. But then I think there's this more agile cycle that we need to have operating inside our business, that looks at strategy and execution as you go, and being able to pivot, as things change. So in Calvary, practically, what that means is, while we've got a strategic intent very much based on our mission and values and our vision for the organisation, and a growth strategy that we've created out of that, we have an annual cycle that sort of checks in, what's happening in the market, what's changing for us, internally, externally. How do we set priorities around the next 12 months? How does that align into budgets? How do we execute and get resources around it? But we've also started moving to a very rapid quarterly cycle of prioritisation. So let's check in. How did we go last quarter? What do we need to adjust for next quarter? Have we got the right things happening? Have we got the right resources attached to that? And I think I'm hearing more and more organisations needing to kind of move into that quick, agile approach to strategy execution.
Fabulous. And I think that's a really common theme where we're seeing about just the speeding up of that cycle. And so, the overall strategy and purpose sort of setting the direction. Are we heading northeast? Which direction are we heading in? But the frequency of that check-in to make those marginal adjustments to make sure we're staying on track and we're not shifting 2 or 3 degrees, left or right too quickly before we can come back to that. I'm going to pick up, I was going to come to this a bit later, but you've sort of taken us there, Vanessa, about, in my observations in working with organisations in the aged care space, more broadly in human services, there's been that really strong kind of purpose-driven, often church and charitable based background. We've come from an environment that was more oriented toward kind of block grant funding and some degree of longer term certainty, and we're shifting in different degrees and different paces in different submarkets toward this consumer direction. And increasingly we're seeing, and you mentioned it there, the need to really engage with the consumer around product. What is it? What are the products you want? And how do we map that into our strategy? And also with the workforce, recognising that the workforce are a real differentiator for us. On the one hand, it's just a battle to get enough people, but equally, if we get the right people, that can really be a differentiator for us in our engagement with consumer and our retention and our attraction. So keen to just sort of unpack this notion about where does customer strategy now sit in your overall strategy, and then maybe we can unpick after that where does your workforce strategy and workforce engagement sit. Maybe Vanessa, do you want to keep going, and we might head back then to Andrew following that?
Yeah, so I think customer strategy and having a customer lens to your strategy is super critical at the moment. Because there is so much disruption in our industry, and we know that the consumers want a different outcome and a different product suite. We've heard that from the Royal Commission, but we know that through how we engage with consumers, and we're seeing that shift in delayed entry into residential aged care. We also know that more care will be provided in the community, but retirement living products are not healthcare. And so there's this very interesting kind of market that I think is opening up around what is supported living, how do we get that right? How do we then bring, residents as they need that more higher level care into residential aged care. That is obviously moving into kind of a subacute, palliative kind of care needs. And so really thinking differently about and taking that lens of the consumer, how do we design new services, new products around that? I think it's critical for us to be doing that now as an industry, because there are new market entrants that will do that for us, and you can, if you look at, what the big tech players are doing, and they're not going to be reliant on, what funding models are in place, and I think sometimes we get too caught up in designing around the funding model. These new market entrants will go straight to the consumers, and they'll open up new products that, will be, much more targeted around the concepts like move once, aging in place, being able to have supported living with, good tech around it. So really thinking about what are the problems that we're solving for the consumers? What is the lifestyle and experience they're looking for? How do you bring that into service offerings? At our Calvary Kooyong today, opening it up, it's a subacute aged care retirement living complex all in one. Now, who would have thought years ago that anyone would want to live where a hospital lives? But we know people do. They want that integrated, seamless, aging in place, move once, and know that they're going to get the care that they need. So I think taking that lens and really driving and thinking about your products. Now, that's easier for me to say in terms of a large organisation like Calvary, but I think you can do it on a smaller scale as well. Think about your market. Think about what your differentiator is to bring that to life.
Thanks, Vanessa. I might come to you, Andrew, and just as I sort of transition to you, we've got a question in the chat that sort of picks up, I guess, a bit of that theme in some senses, Vanessa, about, well, how can you innovate? How can you create new products? How can you deliver something different from customers when there's a bunch of variables in the model that are fixed? So, we've got defined caps on fees and charges. We've got, caps or guardrails around payment for staff and what hours of service are required. And so as we're sort of tightening up on the regulations around how various of the variables in the model work, how do you then create space for innovation, new products, etc.? But I might move to you, Andrew, just on this topic of customer and the role of customer in strategy.
Yeah, look, I totally agree with where Vanessa is coming from. My view is the consumer piece in strategy at the moment is the real game changer. We've got some significant disruptors upon us, both in the regulatory sense with the demise of the bed licensing system, which has essentially provided stability, but it's also limited the impact of innovation opportunity and so forth. So, that the bed licensing system is going to go. That's happening at the same time as the baby boomers are coming into aged care, who have a completely different set of expectations than their predecessors. So, there's this perfect storm happening at all at once. And so, again, my thinking about how this relates to your strategic planning is, typically in a strategic planning process, there's, early on an environmental scan. And I just think it's useful in that sort of phase of your developing your strategic plan in that environmental scan sort of space, as you focus on what's not changing and what is changing. And, the risk in where you move your strategic plan to is mostly going to be in the space of what's changing. And so therefore it focuses your efforts to try and understand, the risks associated with your strategic plan in those particular changing environments. So, and again, that's where I totally agree with Vanessa. At the end of the day, then, what is the product for that new environment? What is the product mix? What is the product continuum? And Vanessa's given some great examples of what some of those things are. So I think my reflection here is, useful in your strategic planning process to understand what's not changing, but be very focused on what is changing.
Thanks, Andrew. And we might come back and we'll come to you, Shane, as well, but come back to whether you might each be able to think of an example of where that focus on customer has led you down a different path or resulted in you thinking about a different product or a different decision, which might be a decision to stop doing something or to start doing something new. There's a struggle I've sort of seen in boards and strategy sessions about, are we wanting to kind of try and be all things to all people? Do we want to be sort of up and down the care spectrum as well as all cohorts? Or do we want to really narrow in on a segment either a customer segment or a product segment we think we can excel in. And so just interested in how, whether you've got some specific examples of where you've wrestled with that, and that focus on customer maybe has changed the decision you might have made. But Shane, your reflections on this focus on customer?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you. And they're really good points that you make there, because strategy is really all about choices. And as leaders who are defining strategy, it's incumbent on you to be bold and make bold choices about the things that you do. And you can't, depending on the size of your organization, you can't necessarily be everything to everyone. What we recognised this at the Bethany Group a few years ago, and we are a moderate-sized organisation. We have 14 aged care homes, about 3,000 home care clients. Pardon me. So by no means the largest organisation in Australia, but also not the smallest. And that means that we had to make choices about the things and the areas that we do, and I guess the where we want to play and how we're going to win in those areas we will play. And so we very narrowly defined the geographical areas in which we would play in, and that's where we had concentration of customers and, more importantly, concentration of staff already. So we play in the Perth metro area and the southwest region, or the north part of the southwest region in Western Australia. And we defined that by looking at some of our peers. We have peers in WA who perform very strongly in other markets, and we didn't feel it was necessary to stretch our resources to enter into newer areas in case it wasn't successful and put a drain on the rest of the organisation. But one of the other key things we did is we involved a lot of our customers and their influences in our decision making. So we sat down with over 300 customers and family members, had empathy interviews, discussed with them what they saw as a really great care experience. We did the same thing with about 150 of our staff across all of our lines of business, and said to them, what makes a really great employee experience for you? One of the great things that we noticed through that is that there was a lot of alignment between the two. Our staff really want to care for people, and our people want to be cared for. They want to live the best experience that they can in whatever line of service that we're providing them. By having those empathy interviews, by sitting down, having a cup of tea and talking to our customers, we were able to define the things that we were really good at as an organisation already. And that then allowed us to double down and think about, what does that mean for the other areas of our business where we may not be so strong? And that's going to, in the future, lead to decisions about certain assets and certain areas of the business where we may need to strengthen, or we may make other decisions so that we can further strengthen the things that we are good at. We then took all of those messages and turned them into what we call the Bethany signature behaviours, and that's the way that we translate the core elements of our strategy and of our service delivery model to our frontline staff, so that they can enact that every day and it can become real for them. Executives sitting around a board table making decisions about the future of the organisation provides really good clarity to those people that are in the discussion, but to really bring it to life, it needs to be real for the people who effectively are your product, and that's your frontline staff. And so you need to find a way to distill your strategic messages into a way that they can be understood by everyone and they can be enacted day to day for every action of service.
Thanks, Shane. That's great, and it picks up on a question we've had come through from the audience as well, just about how you sort of bridge that gap from strategy as designed, in and around the board and executive tables, and how you bring that to life for the organisation. So there's a specific question about how do you keep that strategic intent communicated well to the frontline workforce, so that you get the kind of the pull through to that strategy. So, Vanessa, any further comments from you? I think we're sort of transitioning here from customer to workforce, and that workforce really being as a central focus in strategy. How have you gone about thinking about your workforce, their interests and needs, and how you communicate strategy to them, but also get their input into it?
Yeah, look, I think it's super critical to have the workforce engaged, and over the years that I've done this kind of work, I'm constantly amazed at how, when you engage people in these conversations, people get it. They know what, once they know what you're trying to do and what you're trying to be, they know how to deliver that, and they just need the permission to get on and do it, and they want to be engaged in it. And so often people go, no one's ever asked me what I thought, but now that you have, here's how I think it can be done, and this is what I can do about it. And as long as you support that and give people the resources and the tools to enact it, I think you can have a really incredibly positive experience with your culture, and that's true retention and retention strategy. Because paying people obviously is important. It's that Maslow's hierarchy. You've got to kind of get the basics right, but you've also got to move up the hierarchy and engage them in what matters to them. So I think engaging people in, how might we deliver this strategy is incredibly important. Then cascading that through into the accountabilities that you're asking for them and that you're going to track them by. Particularly for leaders, I think leaders entering new organisations want to know what success looks like for them and how they deliver on it. I think in terms of communication, I think we have to be careful not to get too caught up in just a one-way communication and just about how do you put this on websites and how do you put it on posters and into newsletters and things like that. I think that the critical thing in communicating and really getting strategy delivered through people is what your leaders do. What are your leaders doing about, what are they talking about? What are they seen to be doing and paying attention to? What are they measuring? What are they rewarding and incentivizing? So really getting your leaders sort of their clarity around how they're talking and delivering that strategy and working with their teams, I think is part of the answer.
Thanks, Vanessa. Great responses. And Andrew, anything your reflections on the workforce side?
Look, I totally agree. Again, with Vanessa here, that this is a leadership challenge to get that message across, and so they've got to be talking about it, and they've got to be persistent. They've got to talk about it all the time, so that the message is constant and it's infused in all conversations about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and just linking it back to strategy and the purpose each time. And if as leaders talk more and more about it more and more often, it just becomes part of the conversation for everybody in the organisation. So I reinforce that. It's the leaders, and they've just got to be persistent. It's not just a one-off message. It's got to be in everything.
Thanks, Andrew. So I'm just wanting to maybe pick up on that leadership theme and thinking about the changes in the way in which we go about strategy given the current environment, and I guess just the broader evolution of the context for aged care, and what does that mean for the leadership you need? You're each in positions either in executive or board roles. What's the changing landscape of the leadership you need? And maybe starting, Andrew, with you in your board role, what's that mix you now need on a board that might be different from what it was before to set strategy in this context?
Yeah, look, because the board's role in the strategic development planning process isn't necessarily to develop the strategy. That's the role of the CEO and the executive, and the board will ultimately approve it. But the board needs to provide strategic guidance, and needs to give the executive some direction, and so there's an interesting leadership challenge there around giving that that direction, but then allowing the executive to get on and develop options and solutions to achieve that direction. Given the focus, the growing focus around the consumer and all that means, important to have within the skill set on the board, and ideally, every board is a skills-based board. The ideal is to have people who have had consumer experience. They've come out of an industry with which is very consumer facing. So and there's a range of options for those, but that helps bring the board's leadership through its direction to its executive, helps bring that filter a little bit to trying to understand what consumer needs are, and then how that could be expressed in strategic direction. So, I suppose the key point there is, what has changed is boards are now looking, particularly in the aged care space, are looking to bring people onto the board that have had that consumer-facing experience.
Thanks, Andrew. We're certainly seeing that shift, both in board and executive, and interestingly, in both board and executive recruitment, people are wanting to do their due diligence on organisations in joining as well, and have an understanding of the strategy. Shane, you've come from a diverse background, including banking, retail banking, highly consumer sort of oriented business. Have you got sort of reflections on that skill mix and maybe changes that are happening in the balance of skills organisations are looking for in their executive?
Yeah, certainly. I think so. On face value, banking and providing aged care are very different things, but they are very heavily aligned to consumer focus. So everyone's got a bank account, and at some stage in their life, hopefully, most people will need will need aged care in some way, shape, or form. And so they're both industries that touch all areas of the human life, and so the commonality between the two is really what's been present in banking for a very long time is the focus on consumer sentiment and on consumer needs and consumer-centric strategy, and that has become even ever more present in the aged care industry. Everything we've been talking about already this morning has had the customer at the centre of what we do. I think if we looked at the aged care industry 15, 20 years ago, while there was a very strong focus on customer outcomes, strategies were very much around gaining scale, building lots of property, and maximising the efficiency of your block funding. Today, with consumer-directed care, with consumer-directed funding, and with the growing freedom of choice as to where people receive care, whether it be in residential aged care, whether it be in supported living, whether it be in their own homes, and with the abolishment of bed licenses, the movement of beds into areas where people would more likely like to live, and consumers choosing where they live rather than being chosen for them. I think it's even more present that consumer at the centre of what you do is really important. And so we've seen in our organisation and in some of our peers around Western Australia and around Australia that people are entering the aged care market from employment market from areas such as banking, telecommunications, retail, all those industries that have had a really strong customer-centric focus for a very long time. And there's also a growing prevalence of people with very strong digital backgrounds. So the efficient scale in delivering disaggregated care through a home care business is really going to be enhanced by your digital offerings, whether they be telemedicine or it be just two-way communication with your customers in a real-time environment. Then the greater your digital presence, then the more customer centric you can be, particularly as generations age and digital natives become more prevalent in our customer base.
Thanks. Shane, I'm keen to pick up that digital thread a bit further, as well as maybe part of a kind of triumvirate of things that really need to feature in a contemporary strategy. We've had a question from the audience just about drilling into some more real life examples of how you get that two-way communication happening with your workforce. And Vanessa, you were sort of referencing how important that is, both in sort of strategy setting, strategy communication, alignment. Can you give some examples of the how that's achieved?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways I think you do this. You can do it through governance, and you can do it through your leaders. So, in a governance sense, how do you have regular conversations baking in strategy and execution, and how you're going about it, and how do you have that conversation with your senior people inside the organisation. So an example of that for us is, we have a monthly strategy forum. It's a topic, it's a problem statement. This is a strategy that we're trying to deliver on. We bring in, external speakers to talk about it, and it's a free-flowing kind of conversation. We do it online. We use Mural and, tools, all those great collaboration tools that are out there to be able to just connect with people. And that's not and we don't use our hierarchy for that necessarily. We cut through the organisation and say, well, who's going to be able to, contribute to this conversation? Who's got an interesting lens as a subject matter expert in this area, or someone that can advocate for, their local workforce, experience in this space. Bringing that kind of collaboration together and really helps us to sort of revisit and refine our strategy and think about. We take new ideas to them. We're about to do one around, some of the concepts we're thinking about in assisted living. Just testing it, refining it, getting that on the ground experience. I think the other part, as I said, is about what your leaders do. How are they out there? How are they engaging with teams on the ground? I know we've lived in an online world for the last couple of years. I just think it's critically important now that we're actually face to face with people. You're actually walking through in the services, seeing the things that they're seeing, having those sidebar conversations. I went to a site last week in Launceston, one of our great sites, and, realised that we didn't install the right kind of doors so that people can experience the outdoor living areas as well. And they've been trying to get it fixed, and, go, well, okay, why has it taken so long? Let's get that sorted, out for you. And let's now make sure we bake that into our design guidelines, that we don't do that again. So I think, getting leaders out there, them having not just engaging with their direct reports, but skip meetings into layers down inside the organisation is also, another way of really harnessing what are people experiencing, but what are they hearing and what are they seeing about the effectiveness of your strategy that you're delivering.
Thanks, Vanessa. That's great. And Andrew, I'll come to you on this as well. And I'm just recalling some experience I've had working with an aged care organisation a little while back on their employee value proposition and employee strategy. And I was really fascinated about what are the things on a day-to-day basis that are making a difference to employee experience, and getting that direct feedback. And I think, the executive and the board were also, they weren't the things they thought were going to come up as the major pain points. And it created quite a different focus in terms of both the EVP and the things that they were focused on fixing. But that only happens if you're able to get that direct two-way sort of engagement that you've talked about there, Vanessa. Andrew, have you got some other examples about practically how to get that done?
Yeah, so an example I can give with one of my boards, we were going into a strategic planning process. We had a number of open questions. We created this thing with the workforce called Your Voice Counts. It was a survey, essentially asking questions on points that we were considering to be included in the survey. We then, once we got the results on those, we then went out to our sites, and we had 30 of them across New South Wales, ACT, and a member of the executive and a member of the board, essentially in a training room type scenario. So we had to sort of do it 3 times at each facility because of the shift system, but essentially then gave feedback on their feedback, so that they could see what they collectively had told us, and we read it back to them, and then we gave them a sense of how we would use that. So for people who are looking for an example, that's just a simple one, which was basically a combination of a survey combined with, I suppose, a bit of a talking / listening tour of the leadership team across a whole bunch of sites. And so it gave a sense that when the strategy was launched, of the workforce, having skin in the game. Thanks,
Andrew. That's a really good sort of practical example. I'll just remind people we've got a little over 10 minutes to go. So if there are any particular questions you'd like to ask of the panel, please pop them in the chat, and we can get those through to the panel before we close. I'm interested in picking up, and apologies to the panel that this is somewhat without notice, but picking up that thread around digital. And when we're thinking about strategy, we're thinking about the challenges we're facing: funding, regulatory, operational, service delivery. And when we're thinking about the customer and the workforce as central to strategy, one of the key levers you've got is the way in which you're using technology and or digital. And as Mark Britnell was KPMG's former global head of health, and he had a saying that if you don't have a digital strategy, you don't have a strategy. So I'm just interested in your perspective on how does that focus on digital and technology work, but how do you make it subservient to or working to the benefit of the overall strategy, the focus on customer and the focus on workforce? And so maybe Vanessa, do you want to kick us off with that one?
Yeah, I love that saying, if you don't have a digital strategy, you don't have strategy, because I think it is incredibly important. That's what's going to change this industry. And we all know, AI, ChatGPT, all those kind of, new technologies are exponentially changing the way, we live in our world, and they will change the way healthcare can be delivered. And it's an incredibly important thing for us to leverage. We're not going to get the workforce that we need. We know all the, we've had the disruption to immigration. We know we've got a short pipeline, shortage in the pipeline coming through. So we need to think about how do we, augment our workforce with the right kinds of technology so they can be at top of scope. And if I can advocate for one thing, if there was any of our federal counterparts online, is that you think about virtual care minutes in the next ANAC iteration, because I think that's what we can do to actually support our consumers better in our communities. We've had a very strong digital strategy and leaning really heavily into virtual care in Calvary. And I guess my experience from that has been, I'm surprised at how much consumers are ready for this, and people, when we started we're doing what's called My Home Hospital in South Australia. So it's acute hospital care at home. And then we did COVID support across the country. And people were reticent about, elderly consumers be able to, use this technology. And I think they're probably the better ones in some ways to adopt this. We're used to it in our everyday lives. And so I think, working with consumers, obviously, in how you design care models with the right kind of technology. But, the technology coming through with wearables, remote monitoring, how that will play into supported living, both in residential aged care, retirement living, I think will be fundamental change to how we operate going forward. So setting that strategy, and it's expensive, absolutely. Digital strategies don't come cheap, but I think, if you're a smaller player out there, I think about your partners. Who do you partner with? What's the tech companies that you can actually leverage inside your strategy? And a lot of those tech players are looking for operators that can actually take their products into operating mode, and prove them out. So I think there's certainly good ways to think about small scale pilots, then take those pilots to scale once they're proven out.
Thanks, Vanessa. That's great. Andrew, thoughts from you on digital and tech?
Yeah, look, this is again another disruptor from a range of spaces, and I'll just go firstly to the regulatory space. One of the recommendations out of the Royal Commission was data passing from aged care providers to the Aged Care and Quality Commission, to government, and ultimately to the Australian Institute of Health and Wellbeing. And the thinking at the moment is that's just not clinical data. That is all data associated with the provision of aged care services. So that is your payroll data, your staff data, risk management data, as well as your typical care management system type data. So there is an expectation that aged care providers will have the systems in place to be able to pass that data through that channel, so it ultimately ends up at the Australian Institute of Health and Wellbeing. That is going to be a significant undertaking that within anybody's digital strategy and overall strategy. So because it essentially will become a compliance requirement, and so therefore, we all need to be thinking about how we're going to achieve that. It's going to be very tough for the smaller providers who perhaps don't have big back of house IT. And to Vanessa's point, the solution there I see is around partnering and collaboration. And we may find that a number of providers are actually provided their IT services completely outsourced, such that all those systems are available to meet their reporting and compliance requirements as they roll out from government, because it's quite an undertaking and quite an investment in systems to have all that in place. So that's just in the regulatory space. In terms of actually service delivery, in terms of what the consumer is expecting, again, the key enabler for all of that is going to be technology. And then the open question that we're all still waiting on is around then data management, and there will be more compliance layers around data management. We've already got privacy legislation in place, and I suspect that is still a learning space for us collectively, and particularly even from government through to providers through to consumers. What does all that mean in terms of who owns the data and so forth? So many of those things to be resolved. So I suppose again my key message here is that it has to sit very prominent in your strategy as a key enabler for your purpose.
Thanks so much, Andrew. And we might come to you, Shane, if you've got a quick comment on digital, and you sort of really kicked this conversation off. But then we've got a couple of questions in the chat as well, which you feel free to pick up on. One is about how do you work through this if you've got a sort of a challenge in terms of acceptance or alignment with your board. And then the other sort of really practical question we've got in the chat is around how do you then sort of take your strategy through to KPIs and success measures? So, bridging that gap between, North Star, then more kind of nearer term tactical stuff. And Vanessa, you picked up earlier on your sort of quarterly reviews. What are the sorts of things you're measuring on that more frequent basis to check you're lining up. So Shane?
Yeah, I think really quickly on digital is to, as far as possible, ensure that what you're doing is fit for purpose for your organisation and for your customers and staff. And so you may be from a smaller organisation that doesn't have the means to be able to do everything in the world that you may want to do in the digital space. But there will always be something small that you can focus on, and you start small and build from there. We started our innovation journey at Bethany with through having conversations with our staff and our customers about what the key pain points are in their lives or in their jobs, and we then sought to go and find solutions to those. And picking on what Vanessa mentioned, we partner with our technology suppliers, whether it be Microsoft, Optus, Telstra, all those types of players, and reach into their network of or their ecosystem of suppliers that have cutting edge technology and are looking for test beds. And so we've run many trials across our portfolio of products and services. Some of them have shown us that no, we absolutely shouldn't continue with whatever it was we were trialing, but others we've seen improvement in preventative care, we've seen improvement in customer outcomes, and we've seen improvements in the way our customers and our staff interact with each other, and the enjoyment our staff get from coming to work, and better staff flows. So I guess the key message on that is to be deliberate, be focused, and measure the things that you make sure when you try things, you've got outcomes of success defined, or measures of success defined before you start, so you can work out whether the thing you're trialing actually does what you expect it to do or not.
Thanks, Shane. That's great. So we've got 2 or 3 minutes to go, and we're coming up to Easter, and so I'd like to ask each of our panelists if you could provide a little Easter gift to the audience with your sort of a closing top tip in 30 seconds or less on this topic of strategy. If there's one thing you can leave the audience with, what would you like to share? So Vanessa, I might come to you.
Yeah, look, I think we've talked a lot about how you get consumers and your workforce engaged. The top tip I would say is really understand your leadership team that are going to deliver this and execute this strategy, and understand them as individuals and as a collective. What are the strengths and weaknesses of that team? You know, there'll be people who are good at strategy, you know, coming up with strategy. They'll be good with people with process and execution. And that'll change their responses to the pressures of executing strategy. You know, some people deal well with that uncertainty. Others need different approaches. So I think I would say make sure you really understand that team and how you'd best leverage their skills and experience in coming up with strategy and executing.
Fantastic. Thanks, Vanessa. Might come back via you, Shane, and then close with Andrew.
Yeah, certainly. I guess my top tip is to speak to your customers and speak to your staff. Invest the time to get to know them. They're the ones that know your business the best, because your staff are your product and your customers are the reason that you exist. And so invest the time, sit down with them, have a cup of tea with them, or just have a chat with them, and encourage all of the leaders in your organisation to do that.
Thanks, Shane. Andrew?
Look, my top tip is clarity around purpose, and I know I've already spoken to that, so I might just take a little bit of this time just on another matter, using some of my sort of military planning background, where in that space, often planning in high levels of uncertainty, and I think we're moving into a space in this sector where there is tremendous uncertainty about what that future environment is going to be. So I think it's important in your strategic planning process that you're very clear on what your knowns are, clear on what your unknowns are, and then deliberately decide what your assumptions are. And each time you go back to review and test your strategy, you retest those assumptions. Because if those assumptions have changed, your plan is going to have to be adjusted. So, yeah, so my tip there is be conscious of the assumptions you're making and continue to test them.
Fantastic. Well, we're right on time. Thank you so much, Andrew, Vanessa, and Shane, for joining us today, being so generous with your time and your thoughts. I've had a fabulous time, and I hope the audience has too. To the audience, thank you for joining us today. Directly following today's event, you'll be sent an email with a link to provide feedback. Feedback truly is a gift. We'd love to hear your feedback on today's event so we can continue to work and adjust the way in which we run these going forward to make sure they're of most benefit to you. As I mentioned earlier, there are a whole range of tools and templates available to you through the GFR website. If you've not yet completed the diagnostic tool, that's available to you to support you to generate a learning journey and approach for yourself. Please access those resources, previous webinars and the tools available. Our next webinar is on the 26th of April, and the focus of that webinar will be on service excellence, driving towards innovation and change. We very much hope you can join us, and thank you for your attendance today.